Hello, my name is Matthew, and I was lied to by one of the biggest worm companies in the US. You may be wondering, how did I find out? Well, like literally 15 minutes ago, I watched a video called Red Wiggler Worms versus Blue Indian Worms by Tigger Wiggler's Magic Worm Castings. In this video, Tigger Wiggler talks about the differences between red wiggler worms and blue Indian worms, which are actually pretty similar, but have a lot of differences if you know what you're looking for. These differences include things like the red wiggler has a more pronounced clitellum and the blue Indian worm does not. It has a clitellum, but it's harder to see. The other difference is that red wigglers are more docile, whereas the blue Indian worms are more jumpy and afraid. And I think the biggest difference that's easy to notice is just the size difference. Red wigglers are a lot fatter than their blue Indian worm counterparts. Despite the name, blue Indian worms are actually not blue. Again, I really recommend Tigger Wiggler's video. He actually goes a lot more in depth and he has comparisons. Like he shows you a red wiggler and a blue Indian worm, like live. If you take a look here at my receipt, you can actually see that it says you've recently bought 250 red composting worms, which is how they get around basically being liable for selling you the wrong worm. You are under the impression that you're buying red wigglers because that's what they advertise that they sell. But when you actually go to buy them, they're red composting worms. And like Tigger Wiggler said, there's nothing wrong with the blue Indian worms. It's just a little bit sketchy that they tell you they're selling you one thing and actually sell you a different thing. I think part of the reason that this is so, I guess, upsetting is just that Uncle Jim's Worm Farm is considered one of the best options to buy worms, especially if you can't buy them in person, which is usually the case because it can be really hard to find somebody selling worms in your local area because a lot of people don't really like worms and they don't think that this would be a lucrative business, even though it can be very much so. But when you ask, where do I buy my red wigglers? Everyone always says, oh, Uncle Jim's Worm Farm. But as it turns out, they're not selling you red wigglers, they're selling you Indian blue worms, which, at risk of repeating myself too much here, there's nothing wrong with the Indian blue worms. They're great composting worms. There are differences, but you can't just say you're selling one thing and turn around and sell something else. And again, they get around this, like legal liability wise, by calling them red composting worm because they are red composting worms, but that's a general description of their physique and purpose as opposed to their species, which is what you actually want when you're buying worms. Because if you get the wrong species and you start mixing them, they can get territorial, they can breed and make each other sterile. I will put a study that I read somewhere in the screen right now. They can compete for food sources and outdo each other. So if you bought red wigglers originally and then you bought red wigglers from Uncle Jim's Worm Farm and you mixed them, there's this possibility that bad things could happen. Now the possibility is very small, but it is still a possibility that a lot of people worry about. I actually keep Canadian night crawlers as well. Those are the standard fishing worm if you're unfamiliar. And I keep them separate from my red wigglers for this very purpose. I don't want them to compete for food. I don't want them to kill each other or any of that. Not that worms are violent, but you never know because size difference and metabolism speed difference. It's just not a risk that most people would like to take, especially without knowing that they're taking it. It's fine to mix worms if you know that you're mixing the worms and you know that there's a possibility of these things happening. But if you don't know, you might suddenly have your worm bin fail and you think it's your fault when it's not. Another problem with these blue worms being sold to us as red composting worms and giving us the impression that they're red wigglers is that red wigglers are a lot more temperature adaptable. You can put them in colder environments and they will still be fine. So if you're assuming that what you have is red wigglers and you put them in a temperature that would be fine for red wigglers but not so fine for Indian blue worms, you have a problem. Another thing I've noticed, which he mentioned in his video, was that they tend to freak out when the barometric pressure changes. So, like when it rains, they all come to the surface and they start trying to escape, which is why I always move my worms indoors whenever it rains. And I assumed that it was because of the water, but it might actually be because of the barometric pressure. However, red wigglers don't do that. I personally am not going to try to seek a refund for this. I bought my worms long enough ago that it's probably not possible, even if I wanted to. But if you recently bought your worms from Uncle Jim's Worm Farm and you are in the same predicament that I am in and that many others are in, you can probably get a refund and return them. So essentially, just be careful what you're buying online. Read the listings incredibly carefully. And if you want a specific species of worm, don't get them from Uncle Jim's Worm Farm because they're going to sell you something else.